Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the RepPath Podcast. Today, guys, we're going to talk about a more advanced topic, and that's value-based selling. So I want a lot of you to get out of selling products and instead selling outcomes. That's the key difference if you want to be successful in this business, especially in medical device sales. But before we get into that, as always, guys, some quick housekeeping. Any questions, please submit them into the chat and we'll address them halfway through the show. So it doesn't matter. It could be on topic, off topic. Obviously, we want to prefer to be on topic, but anything that's on your mind, feel free to submit it into the chat. For any of you that are still trying to break into this business, I say it every week, guys, join the RepPath Academy. Go on reppath.com. There's the link on the screen there. Click the link. You could see the testimonials from all the individuals that have already graduated from the academy, the statistics of all our success, and the big companies that we work with all around the country to help reps get placed with. So please go on reppath.com or shoot me a DM so I can learn more about your background and answer any other questions you may have about the academy. Lastly, guys, if any of you want to get a recording of this podcast or any other material that we produce, any other content, go on my YouTube channel, the RepPath Academy. There's the link below. And please click and subscribe to the Academy. It's 100%, to my channel. It's 100% free. And you'll be able to get all the content that we produce, including all future content that we come out with. So let's dive right into today's topic. And like I said before, guys, we're going to talk about value-based selling. So we want to get everyone out of the old mentality because it's a dying mentality, guys. It's a dying approach of just constantly just going features, benefits. Doctors do not give a shit. Okay? Just going to say it straight up. If you're not selling outcomes, you're not providing value. Features and benefits mean nothing unless there's an outcome tied to it. Now, obviously, you're going to address what certain features, you're going to address what that means. But if you don't tie it to an outcome, it goes on deaf ears, guys. All right. So that's where we want to start this discussion. And what are we talking about, when we talk about outcomes? Because the healthcare environment has changed. It's moved away from volume and moved into value. So what does that mean? So especially in the hospital space for medical device reps out there, what do these hospitals care about? They care about clinical outcomes, cost efficiency, and patient experience, amongst many other things. But that's what they're looking for. So in the end, you're no longer selling a product, you're selling an outcome. Okay? So what is value-based selling? It's basically aligning your solution to a measurable impact. Examples, reduced admissions, shorter length of stay, improved workflow efficiency, and then better patient outcomes. Okay, so value basically is, clinical impact plus economic impact plus operational impact. And so why has this taken over from the old school, features and benefits model? Why is product pitching essentially failing today? The doctors already understand, guys. They already understand the product specs. What they care about, especially, with procurement. Procurement is, these are the departments that are buying the products that are dealing with the finances essentially in the hospital. And it's about the total cost of care. So a lot of these decisions these days are made by committees. There's not one-on-one doctors that are going, yep, I want that in our hospital, so let's buy it. Very few and far between where one doctor has that much say that he could just say, yep, I want this and it's going to happen. Now, again, there's a lot of influential doctors out there that when they want something enough, they gather the committee, get enough people on their side, and then they purchase whatever system or product that they're looking to purchase, or get whatever drug on the formulary, get whatever device approved so it can be utilized and get utilized, or essentially get put on whatever GPO. They can have a lot of influence, but at the end of the day, it's still run by committees. So there's two different committees you guys should know about if you're selling in the hospital space. Number one is the P&T committee. That's the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. That's for pharma. So whenever you get a new drug, again, you don't just walk in there, talk about features and benefits, and then sell your drug. Okay. You got to tie that to patient outcomes. And if you don't have that, if you don't have the patient outcomes there, and you're just talking about how many, milligrams of estrogen are in this pill, or, certain side effect profiles, and you think that that's going to, work by just showing us a shiny, glossy detail aid, it's not going to work, guys. They need to see the outcomes. They need to see the data. So you have to have a lot in your bag of proof to go in there that you're going to get a champion on your side. And a champion is another physician, an influential physician that is going to go in there and go to the P&T committee when they meet and then discuss why they should add your drug to their current formulary, their list of approved drugs. And there's a couple of key things that you have to realize when you're doing this. These are things that I learned the hard way, guys. These committees don't meet every day. They might meet once a month. They might meet once a quarter. Okay. So one of the things that I learned, I didn't realize how important timing is. And what do I mean by timing? If they have a P&T committee meeting coming up in 3 weeks, and Dr. Jones is your champion, you go in there, you show Dr. Jones all the studies, present this study. Here's this table in this study. I want you to show him this data. You could refer to this table, and you get Dr. Jones all prepped, and he's ready to go. He knows it inside and out. It's 3 weeks from now. What do you think is going to happen in 3 weeks? Trust me, guys, Dr. Jones isn't going to remember shit, or he's even going to forget about the P&T committee meeting. So if that happens, guys, that is a nightmare, because you put in all this work and you mistimed it. So what I would do, still have the meeting 3 weeks ahead of time to prep them, but you better be in there a day or two before prepping them again, maybe even the morning of, as a reminder to be at the hospital. Believe me, guys, these doctors are very busy. They might love your drug. They might say this is the greatest thing in the world, but at the end of the day, they have a million different things on their mind. They have patients' lives at stake every day. They have a practice. They have a business. They have partners. They have their staff. There's a lot of different challenges that go on. Excuse me. And you're also not the only rep. There's 50 reps calling on that. So there's a lot going on. They might have multiple products in different therapeutic areas that they like. They can't go in there every day and saying, yeah, I want this product, that product. This. They don't have a wish list. So you got to make sure that you're timing it and you're prepping them, because you're not allowed in those meetings. Years ago, they used to allow reps to come in and sell to everyone. That shit is long gone. So you need a champion in there that could go in there and sell it for you. And believe me, guys, as smart as doctors are, it's hard to get a doctor to sell it like you could sell it. They got too much on their mind. It's not as important to them as it is to you. So learn that you need to know about the P&T committee, because it's very important to sell outcomes to them. And vice versa, if you're talking about med device, there's the VAC committee, and that's the value analysis committee. And it's the same typical, type of process in terms of how often they meet. They might meet once a month. They might meet every couple of months, every other month. A meeting could get canceled, get rebooked 2 weeks later. So the difficult thing, on top of timing this too, and the same works with timing with VAC too, but another difficult thing is, who the hell are these people, right? They don't wear VAC badges or P&T badges on. They don't want you to know who they are. That is a fact, okay? Now, when you're a good rep and you're doing digging and you're probing enough and you're in your hospitals enough and you're learning the staff and building relationships, you're going to find out who's on that committee, and you don't need to know every single member on the committee. There could be 15, 20 people on there. There could be 10, 8, but you want to find out the key players, especially in your department. I used to call on anesthesia for years in the hospital space, and I always knew at least who represented anesthesia in that P&T for those P&T committee meetings, or VAC committee meetings, what surgeon was in there. You need to know who those individuals are, because not only do you need a champion, but you also need to be selling value and outcomes not only to that champion, but the other members of the committee. Because again, they're going to vote on this at the end. The champion's good to push it, but if you can get more buy-in from other departments, even better. You could call on someone in materials management. They might be on the committee. There might be someone on finance on the committee. You don't know. There might be someone from nursing. If you can get more individuals that know about your product and see the value, then you're going to be successful. But again, guys, if you go in there with detail aids and sell features and benefits, you are going to fail. You have to tie it to outcomes. Okay? It's outcomes, outcomes, outcomes. Everything comes back to patient safety, money, workflow. They want to see how it affects, all these different areas. And speaking of that, you got to know your audience, guys. This is so important. So you could sell one product and have 4 different pitches. And this is legit because you're calling on physicians, nurses, administrators, CFOs, whoever's other C-suite people, but all of them have different needs. They have different drivers. If you're calling on a physician, they're going to most likely care about clinical efficacy and patient outcomes. So you're going to structure your conversations more clinically to a physician. You're going to talk about those patient outcomes with the physician, the efficacy rates, the safety profile of whatever drug, whatever that is. That's important to the physician. Now, when you're talking to nurses, they're going to care more about the ease of use, the workflow. Because if it's a new device and there's 50 different steps that you got to add now because your device is basically a pain in the ass for them, you have to simplify that for them, guys. If you just think you're going to go in there and be like, hey, Bob, Susan, whoever the nurse is, all you got to do is these 15 extra steps, and that's it. No big deal. And if you don't understand what that means to them, trust me, guys, they are not going to like that message. So you have to focus on how that makes their life easier. Because a lot of these products the doctors could love, the nurses could see that and go, this is going to be a nightmare for me. And then they tell the doctors, why can't we just use the other product? And sometimes the doctors aren't that strong. They don't feel that strongly about it. Go, yeah, that's fine. I'll use whatever. I mean, they're smart. They're smart individuals, guys. They can use many different tools to get the job done. So you got to make sure that messaging is focusing on the nurses with workflow, ease of use, because you make it easier for them. They're going to back you to that physician. They're going to back you to whoever those other members are. But if you make it harder, it's going to be a 180 and they're going to be against you. Next, administrators. Again, they're going to care about cost savings, efficiencies. What does this cost us? And I learned the hard way with this. I went in there and I was selling a spinal cord stimulator years ago, and I didn't take down our list price. I was selling it to a hospital. I don't want to give prices and hospital names or anything, but I basically went in there with list price. I did a couple cases, and I was so happy because I was getting like 1.5 times as much as I normally would with many of my other hospitals, but they weren't questioning it. So here I am thinking that everything's great. I never had a conversation with purchasing. I never had a conversation with the administrators in that department. And what happened? After they started to recognize 4 or 5 cases in a row, and now we're getting over 100,000 in billing to them. Now it's going to start to raise an eyebrow. I got on their radar, and then they brought me in and they tore me apart. And instead of me going in there and addressing those needs first and talking to them about cost, but breaking down the value and how much money they're going to save because they can do more procedures, talk about those cost savings, show them the list price and show them what I can offer them. And meanwhile, even though I'm not going to make as much per case, I wind up, hurting myself in the long run because I made good bonuses. I made good commission, on the first couple of cases. But what did that do? They didn't want to use me after that. So I screwed myself. Instead of going in, negotiating at the beginning, showing them some savings, I would have had many more cases and a longer relationship at that hospital. But again, I screwed up. And lastly, CFOs. They're going to care about ROI, guys. It's just that simple. When I worked for one of my previous companies, in robotics, we had an ROI model. So we will be able to break everything down. It was a really, really impressive model that was specific really for CFOs. I mean, sometimes administrators, some of the doctors that cared about the finances in the department because they were the chiefs of the department, they were obviously concerned about that too. But the messaging was all ROI driven. I'm not going to go in there and bring in 10 studies showing the clinical efficacy with the CFO. They're going to look at me like, what the hell are you doing? So you have to change your messaging no matter what it is. Okay. And you need to know your audience, guys. You can't go in with the wrong messaging to the wrong audience member, because it's going to backfire. They're going to zone out in the meeting, or they might cut you off and just say, hey, listen, thanks for coming in. Basically you're not addressing their specific needs. So remember, you have one product, or you could have multiple products, but say for that one product, you could have 4 or more different strategies, different presentations. It could be that diverse. So know your audience, guys. If you know that and come in with the right messaging and show the right outcomes that they're looking for, whether it's clinical, whether it's financial, then you're going to be super successful. Next, guys, got to stop leading with products. Okay, I'm going to say that straight up. Stop going in there leading with your product. It doesn't work. I say this all the time. I know I piss some people off, especially managers. When I go in, I tell reps, when I'm coaching reps, try your best in that first meeting with the doctor not to mention your product. If you do that, I will guarantee you're going to be more successful. If a doctor straight up asks, what are you selling? You could say what you're selling, but before we get into that, and you want to ask questions, you want to probe, because the whole point is leading with their problems, not the product. If you go in there leading to address whatever problems they have, if you're asking what challenges are you seeing with XYZ, or where are you losing time or money, just random questions like that, guys, but specific, addressing the problems, and then you provide the solution. You don't go in with a product that they might not even use. I know I've said this a million times, guys. I've burned myself so many times, all excited because I got time with a physician that I was waiting weeks to get in front of. I had a lunch with, and I came in and just threw up all kinds of features and benefits bullshit. And the doctor was like, I don't even do this procedure, but I never asked him. So it's 3 meetings down, and I'm finding out that he doesn't even do this certain procedure. So ask questions, guys. Diagnose whatever problems they're having first. You have to uncover those problems. You can't go in there with the same message every time, because one hospital might not have as big issues in their department as another one does. Everyone's different. Don't go in assuming every hospital has this issue, so I'm going to just talk about that. No, they might not have that, or it might not be as big of a deal at one hospital for another. So make sure you're asking problems. You need to diagnose before you prescribe. A doctor doesn't just have you come in and go, you know what, I'm just going to give you, if you're seeing your physician, for instance, just so you guys realize, pretty effective analogy here. You don't go into a doctor's office as a patient and he just goes, you know what, you probably have one of the 5 of these, possible illnesses, especially in the winter. It's either the cold, the flu, whatever, maybe COVID-24, whatever we're on now. And I'm just going to give you a couple of antibiotics. I'll give you a Z-Pack and you'll be on your way. Just every patient, just don't even talk to them and just give them a couple drugs. And, odds are it's going to probably treat some of the patients, but there's going to be a lot of people that are still sick. You didn't treat shit. So what do? They ask you a lot of questions. Are you experiencing this symptom? What's been going on with your head? What's your temperature? What's your blood pressure? They might run blood. They do all these diagnostic tests. They do all these things to figure out what is wrong with you first. And then they provide a solution. They provide a medication. They might provide another solution as a procedure. So that's how they use a medical device. But just think that way, guys. Why would you go in there with solutions before you know what the problem is? That's the wrong way to sell. You need to diagnose the problem first and then provide a solution. So just think about it as from that patient's point of view. That's why good doctors, they diagnose. They probe, asking a lot of questions, do all these tests. Now, a lot of times, let's be real, guys, we all get pissed off. I don't want to do this test. I don't want to do that test. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. And yes, a lot of times it is a lot of bullshit that they're just billing, because whatever. Or sometimes they have to do these tests so they can give you, for instance, you have to get the x-ray that never shows anything before you get the MRI. That's just, we're not going to get into an insurance conversation here. But the whole point is they do a lot of these things to weed out what other, potential problems it's not, that it could be masking. So they do all that first, find out what the problem is, and then they provide that solution. So sell the same way, guys. Diagnose and then provide solutions. You're going to be very successful. So at the end of the day, that's how you separate yourself as a consultant, and you're not a sales rep. A consultant diagnoses problems. Sales reps sell features and benefits. If you can be viewed as a consultant, that is huge, because a consultant provides value. A sales rep just sells shit. That's the way I look at it. They're bringing value. They care about the outcome, not just the features and benefits. So you don't want to go in there looking like a walking catalog, guys. Be viewed as a consultant. So next, got to quantify the value. This is where they love data, guys. You're going to hear doctors a lot say, show me the literature. You used to hear this all the time in anesthesia. Show me the literature. Show me the literature. That means show me the studies. Show me the data. If you go in there with a study with 2 people in the study that you did out of your garage, obviously I'm exaggerating, but if it's a small study, that there's 30, patients involved, and they're looking for 30,000 in some of these studies to really give good, proven data, they're never going to listen to that shit, because they care about the data. They care about the numbers. It's all about the outcomes. They care about the reduction in complications, the percent reduction, the minutes saved per procedure, the dollars saved per patient. So you want to go in there with case studies, with economic data, and then also with real world evidence, So it's so powerful when you could go in there with those clinical studies, showing the data on a mass scale, and then also show some real world evidence, sometimes from their neighboring hospitals, something a little local. Might not be their competitive hospitals that you want to talk about. That doesn't always go over well, because you got to learn that too. You got to learn the landscape. A lot of these hospitals, just as a side note, you got to, before you give a clinical success story, either on the physician level, or the hospital level, you want to make sure you're not just picking a competitor or someone they don't like. Because a lot of times, I've talked about this in previous podcasts, I brought up success stories from other doctors that I just assumed, because they're in the same area, that Dr. Jones likes, and you see him roll his eyes, and you ask him, he's like, I hate that bastard, and you're like, whoa, geez, I didn't realize what I just said. And it actually, no matter how good the success story is, he doesn't care. She doesn't care. All the more now they don't want to use it because they can't stand the other physician. They want nothing to do with whatever that person's using. Same with hospitals. But again, those are rare occurrences. Doesn't mean every time they hate their neighbors and it's all big competition. It's not always like that, guys. But at the end of the day, if you could have that clinical data and showing the numbers, showing the data, and then having, some of the real world success stories, for instance, we implemented this 6 months ago at NYU, and to today, it's saving them 12 minutes per case. They're able to do an additional 2 procedures a day. Now I'm showing them time savings, and it resulted in what outcome? Being able to do more cases. That means more money in their pocket. That means more profitability for the hospital. That's what they're listening to. Not that it has my sheath is the most steerable sheath on the market, or it's 6.2 centimeters versus the average that's 8.2. It's much thinner. Guys, that's not an outcome. That's just, one of the features. You got to tie it to a clinical outcome, to a real or a financial outcome. So, so again, you want to make sure you have those outcome-based stories, So what, similar to, I know a lot of you guys talk about answering STAR questions in interviews or CAR questions, situation, task, action, result, or context, action, result. Same thing here, guys. You got to give, what was the problem? When you're telling these stories, talk about the problem at XYZ hospital or with whatever physician that they were faced with in their practice, and talk about what you did to intervene, and then you give the measurable result. So for instance, at hospital XYZ, we reduced infection rates by 28% after switching to our product, not because of features, because of consistency and compliance. So you give a little bit more depth and more specifics and numbers, data into what your solution provided. Because especially in the hospital space, guys, this is so important when you're selling outcomes, when you're dealing with value-based care trends. So for instance, what do I mean by that? Bundled payments. So what's a bundled payment? So essentially, say you're doing a knee surgery at a hospital, they're going to get one lump sum of money. Well, it's going to be a lot more than this, but say they get, $30,000 to do a knee replacement. So it's a bundle payment. They're getting that $30,000. Now, everything they do, has to come out of that $30,000. So if they have a lot of cost savings, they don't do a lot of extra bullshit tests, they don't do a lot of wasted, procedures, they don't spend a lot on the actual device, because you got to understand that, guys. If they're in a bundled payment, and you got these purchasers, you have materials management, whoever it is, even the physicians saying, we can't pay that, and you're like, what do they care? The hospital's paying for it anyway. No, because the hospital can potentially lose money every case. A lot of these hospitals aren't profitable. If they don't have endowments, guys, they fold. So believe me, they're already, operating in the red many times. So you have to go in there and you have to be cognizant of that and realize that they're having, this could, if they're under a bundle payment, you need to know what kind of, value-based care that they're being paid on. So everything is going to come out of that payment. It's very important. You need to know that, guys, because that'll show. You can't go in there and just say, I'm just going to charge them $50,000 for your product when the whole bundle payment is $50,000 or $30,000, whatever that number is. Okay, so you need to know that. Again, risk sharing models are similar to. It's based on outcomes. So the hospital and the insurance company both share the risk. So you want to make sure, again, they care about those outcomes, because the patient outcomes is going to result to the more complications, the more time it takes, the more money it's out of their pocket. So whenever a hospital gets a readmission, guys, it's a nightmare. That's why they always talk about readmission rates. Why do they care so much? They care so much because they lose money every time someone gets readmitted. So if you don't realize that, you need to know those rates. You need to know how you compare to other products that are on the market in your class. It's always going to be very important. They don't want to lose money. So you need to know all this data. And lastly, guys, you want to collaborate and not sell. And this goes back to what I was saying about being a consultant and not a sales rep anymore. So position yourself as a problem solver, as a resource, and most importantly, as a partner. Okay? So always offer training. That's one of the first things you can do, and build strong relationships in those hospitals, in those practices. Offering to train everyone about whatever your product is. Let them know the specifics, especially whoever's going to be using this, who's ever going to be in the OR, who's ever going to be in the talking to patients about a different device or a different pharmaceutical drug. You want to train them. That's seen as a real partner. You just don't want to focus just on the physicians and ignore everyone else. Because if this is going to impact other people in the hospital or office, you want to make sure they're fully trained. It's also going to help you be seen as a partner more. Again, you want to provide that data analysis. A lot of times when we introduce new products into hospitals, we have evaluation forms, because we want to get it approved. We don't want to go in there to the P&T or the VAC committee and say, hey, everyone loved it. No, you show them the data, show them all the evaluation forms that were filled out, which you'll have ratings. What did they feel about this product? Something simple, but 0 to 10, what was it rated? You got all these 10s. Now you have the data in front of them. That's powerful. So collect as much data. You can collect the timing saved in cases. I mean, a lot of these companies, they have abilities to collect a lot of data. You want to help them analyze that and show the real value in whatever you're selling. And then lastly is guidance during implementation. So important, guys. Don't think just because they're a smart doctor or these are smart individuals in hospitals, you're just going to explain something once and then you're on your way. You're going to do a lunch, they love it, and then you're gone. No, it takes a lot of hand holding. So you want to guide them through, especially if it's during a trial, because a lot of these products get evaluated, like I said, in the hospitals where they could be trying it out for 3 months, 6 months. You want to be incredibly attentive. This is your number one priority. If you have multiple going on at once, that's great. But you got to give them a lot of TLC, guys, because you can't assume that just because you implemented it, then that's it. You got to continue to provide that guidance, continue to provide that training, continue to share that data with them, that things are going in the right direction. Because if they're not, you got to nip it in the bud quickly before it starts to spiral out of control. So at the end of the day, you want to win the relationship, not just the deal. Okay, but I'm going to pause here. James, any questions from the crowd?
Yeah, Joe, we got a couple for you. We got Hannah Baldry. She goes, Joe, what was your why?
What was my why? What, in getting into the industry?
I'm guessing, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my why, I spent a couple of years at St. James Hospital in the operating room. I always wanted to be a doctor. I always wanted to help people. I wanted the responsibility of handling the real problems in there. Ever since I was a kid and, in football, I wanted to go ball at the goal line. I wanted to take the last shot. I wanted that pressure. So I originally wanted to be a doctor because I wanted the pressure of handling the real life challenges. Now I pivoted to sales because what I loved about medical sales is that being in the operating room, dealing with patients, dealing with real lives on the line, seeing this when I volunteered at St. James and seeing doctors look at 25, 30-year-old sales reps, and they have gray hair, the doctors, and they're looking at these young reps and seeing, looking for them for guidance. I'm like, wow, I want that. I want that kind of responsibility. I wanted to come home every day knowing I made an impact, not that I just sold something. Love to sell, love to make money. But at the end of the day, it was knowing that I made an impact, in such an important environment. That was my why.
We have Andrew Cox. Better to identify health systems /IDN's pain points and health outcomes first in order to discover better fit solution-wise for your particular product.
Is that a question or
there's a question at the end. There's a question mark at the end.
Okay, so
I'm guessing he meant to say, is it better? But he said, better to identify health systems /IDN's pain points and health outcomes first in order to discover a better fit solution-wise for your particular product. If you want to read it yourself here.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I mean, that's an easy one. But bottom line, 100%. You need to focus on what is important to them, and whether it's an IDN, whether it's a single hospital, a community hospital, or a small doctor's office. I mean, that goes across the board no matter what.
I got Maria Santoro. Joe, how do you even learn what outcomes matter to a surgeon if you've never been in an OR?
Like I said before, ask questions. You shouldn't have to know. It doesn't matter what you know in the past. Now, of course, experiences help, but don't go in there with assumptions. That's the worst thing you could do. A lot of times, the more you know could hurt you because you start assuming, you know, I mean, you go on 10 dates and certain girls have the same thing that you don't like, or they, you know, for whatever reason, you start to stereotype like, oh, well, I see the same girl a million times. It's not going to work out for me, you know, and you start to have like a negative output. You don't want to meet physicians and say, oh, well, they look similar to this practice, or this hospital similar to that hospital, so they probably only care about X, Y, and Z. No, you have to ask questions. Don't ever assume, guys. You know, it really does. It'll destroy your approach. You know, and you'll wonder why. How come no one's getting back to me? Last 3 hospitals, this is what they cared about. This guy's not even responding to that because you didn't ask questions. It could be a totally different thing that they care about than the other hospitals care about, or the other physicians care about. So make sure you're uncovering those pain points. What are the problems they're dealing with? Don't mention your product, guys. If you do that in every, before you meet, the first time you meet with any doctors, I guarantee you're going to be opened up to a different approach that you weren't even, ready for. It could change your approach drastically, is what I'm saying. Sorry, my light just died. Can you hear me, James?
Yeah, sorry, just someone came in the room. I didn't want to do the door slams. When are you going to learn to charge your lights or get an extension cord so you can just plug them in?
It's much more complicated than you think, but we'll talk about that later.
I got Ryan Crosco. How long did it take you personally to stop defaulting to product features and actually start leading with outcomes in your conversation?
Longer than I should, man. Honestly, I mean, I was, especially my first year, I was selling birth control and pain medications. And I was a young, 23, 24-year-old, and I was an idiot, basically. I would always go in there focusing on, memorizing the features, the benefits, features and benefits. I had my detailed aids out all the time, and then, I'd say probably, realistically, by the end of my first year in sales, I started to get in the groove, because when you first start, you get overwhelmed by the amount of information that's being thrown at you. You're starting in a new industry, right? That's overwhelming. You're walking into doctors' offices and you're shocked because everything they taught you in training is not exactly how it is in the field. Wow, like doctors really don't want to see me that often. I'm getting doors shut on me left and right. What the hell is going on here? I got all this admin work. I have to do all this clinical training. There's all these modules that even after I get hired, I thought I was done with training. They continue to train you. You have to prepare for ride-alongs. Just keeping your car organized is at first is like a headache. Tracking samples, putting your call notes in, doing your expense reports. All this shit adds up, and you're worrying about every little thing. And a lot of times you ignore the most important things. So I'd say going towards the end of my first year that I really got in the groove. I learned a lot with what a lot of the challenges that physicians were having. And also through conversations, I knew what they really wanted. I knew the outcomes that they were looking for. And I started to be, more laser focused on those outcomes. And that's where I started to see a big change in doctors being more receptive to what I was saying.
We got Brian Hennessy. What do you do when the surgeon already loves a competitor's product and doesn't care about your outcome data? How do you even get your foot in?
When he already loves a competitor's product, he doesn't care about our data.
Yeah, like your outcome data, he said.
Well, first off, you got to find out what they do, what they like about that other product. You need to do more digging. Are you just presenting the wrong data? Because just because it's data, just because it's outcomes, like I said before, know your audience. Some doctors, you would think, only care about the clinical, but they might, again, they own a practice. They could care about the clinical and the financial. If you're just coming in there with clinical outcomes and you're just bombarding them with this, they could be saying, yeah, I could get this with 10 other products. At the end of the day, I care about the financials. How much money am I going to save with this? So you got to start finding out what's important to you. What do they like about what the other rep provides or the other product provides? And then at least you know the landscape, and then see how you could compare. But until you know that, again, everyone's different. So you don't want to assume, but you can, once you know that, then you'll be able to sell better. But just because they say, I don't like your data, okay, it could be because you're presenting the wrong data. You want to make sure that you know your audience, present the right data. But the only way to do that, again, ask a lot of questions, find out what their problems are and their pain points are, and then you'll be able to figure that out.
We got Andrew Cox is back. He said, Joe, what's your approach to developing champions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so for instance, I'll give you a difficult scenario. So hopefully this makes it a little bit, I like to explain difficult situations because hopefully the other ones are even easier when you're faced with them. But in anesthesia, we sometimes have, there were some practices, like I called on Hackensack. They had 70 different anesthesiologists on staff, and then I had smaller hospitals like Chilton that had like 15, 20 anesthesiologists. So there could be huge groups, right? A lot of times you think the chief is the one that you want to go after. If I get the chief behind me, then that's great, but sometimes it could be an attending physician that doesn't have as much, clout in the department as the chief, but they could be a champion. You need to have conversations with all these different physicians. You got to work your ass off, guys, because you'll see, you'll be doing a lunch, you'll be doing a presentation. A lot of times I would just sit in the lounge. I would sit in the lobby, wherever, or wait outside. Back then, you could wait outside the operating room. But basically, if you're sitting in the lounge, doctors are coming in and out. You start talking about your product, and you'll see, just because the chief carries a lot of clout in that department, he might not give a shit about your product. You want to keep chasing after the chief if you have 5 other attendings that love it, and then that's how you need to get the buy-in. You need someone that has that drive and passion for your product. And they're in there, guys. They're in every hospital. They're in every department. But you got to work your ass off to find them. They're not the same title every time. But if you got someone that is really excited about your product, that really sees the value, because this happened to me. I remember consulting with a company, a different mask, and we were working at Englewood, and one of the doctors who was just an attending, she fell in love with this mask, loved it. We brought another physician in to help show them how to do this during the cases, how to utilize it. She kept calling my cell phone all week. Joe, I got another patient. Joe, I got another case coming up. Joe, can you be here this week? Now I realize, holy shit, this is a sign of a champion. This is someone that I need, because every time I was in there, she was telling other doctors what we were doing, how much she loved this product and the benefits of this product. So it was awesome. That's how you find them, guys. But they're never going to be a certain title every time. And they're also not going to be, they're not going to wear a sign that's saying, a big S, a big C on it saying champion. It's not going to be that way, guys. So you have to put the work in. But the ones that are really reaching out, the ones that are always wanting to use your product, you see them in the lounge talking to other doctors about it, that's a sign of a champion. And that's the person that you really want to work with to get behind your product.
We got Hannah Baldry is back. When you were pitching it to a hospital, are the doctors meeting at a certain spot and this is scheduled, or are we walking and grabbing them on the way to the OR?
So it depends. When the reality is access has changed so drastically. So the days of just running into doctors outside of the OR are far and few between. A lot of times that still happens today because these are reps that are already in the hospital doing cases, selling another product. So they already have access. They're coming out of a case with a different doctor. That's where they have an advantage. So a lot of those bigger companies, when they have new products coming out, it's a little bit easier for those reps to get time with doctors because they're already in the cases already with them. So they can walk with them and going from another case. They could sit with them in the lounge. But if you're a brand new rep that has no access, you want to set up an appointment. So this can happen. It could happen. It doesn't have to happen in the hospital. Don't forget, all these practices have, all these doctors have practices. So you can meet them in their office. I mean, a lot of times I would meet with cardiologists at their office and I would get time with them. I would schedule a lunch. I'd schedule a meeting with them, and get on their calendar. It's not easy, but it could be in the office. It could be in the hospital. A lot of times, again, it could be in between cases in the lounge. It could be in the lobby, to meet them. I mean, really, wherever they could say, let's go to the cafeteria, sit in the cafeteria and talk. But it doesn't have to be in the hospital. And especially when you're launching a new product for a smaller company and you don't have access to that hospital yet, you're not credentialed. Credential is another big thing, guys. If you don't know what that is, look up vendor credentialing. Look up companies like VendorMate, IntelliCentrics, Simpler. These are big vendor credentialing companies that if you're not credentialed, you can't go work in that hospital. Your company, you should be speaking to them first about getting vendor credentialed if you have to be in the hospital. Most companies will have you set up. But once you're set up, that gives you the ability to sell. It's still hard. Access is still tough, but it doesn't have to be in the hospital. If you could get time in the office, get in front of them in the office.
I got Laura Pennington. Same last name as a great Jet quarterback, Chad Pennington.
I remember Chad.
Bust.
Yeah, like a size 18 foot.
Yeah.
It was like something weird.
He never was the same after his injury. But we got, when your product is genuinely comparable to the competition on outcomes, what separates the rep who wins from the one who doesn't?
Yeah, and it's that simple. It's the rep. That's simple. You want a Me Too product, guys. A lot of people say, oh, my product sucks. It's just like everyone else. No, you suck. And that's me being real. If you have the same exact product, think of this. You have the same exact product as someone else. It does the same shit, we'll say. Basically, and guys, realize this. Even the products that have benefits over another product, from a physician's point of view, we're always going to think it's a bigger deal than it really is. We're going to overanalyze the data. It's showing, a 4% adverse events versus ours, which is 6%, or ours is only 2%. That's a huge difference. To the doctors, it's like, whatever. It's not that big a deal. So if you have the same exact product, same outcomes, everything, but the doctor is using the competitors and you're complaining because you have a Me Too product, it's not separating enough. That's why you're struggling. No, it's because you suck and you're not doing a good job with customer service. You're not doing a good job being seen as a consultant, as a true partner. You're not bringing value. So look at yourself, right? I've been in the shoes and I've been the one bitching, going, oh, what the hell? Our pricing, if we lower the price, we could get all this business. I would always want to drop price. That was my big thing when I was younger. Oh, we're just as expensive as everyone else. If we drop the price, we'll get the business. The doctor said so. It's all bullshit, guys. A lot of times, just as a quick side note, when you're younger, you always think it's price, price, price. It's not. Every hospital, if you sell it, if it's a $10,000 product, they'll say it's too expensive. If you lower it to $50, they'll say it's too expensive. I've learned this, guys. So if it's the same exact product with the same exact data, it's on you. You're the differentiator. It's your service, what you bring to the table, what value you add. That's going to get them to switch.
I got Jenna Falcone. Do you find that value-based selling works differently in ASCs versus big hospital systems, or is the approach universal?
Oh, it's definitely much different. Because in an ASC, now let me just clarify, a lot of ASCs are owned by hospital systems now. When they first came out years ago, and for you guys that don't know what we're talking about, ambulatory surgery centers. When they first came out years ago, there were a lot of doctors that, a group of doctors were partners. They would open up a surgery center. There'd be a surgeon, a couple of surgeons, an anesthesiologist, and they did great. They'd open up these ASCs. They would crank out. They'd have to do anywhere near the volume a hospital did They didn't have the overhead that a hospital did, and they made a lot of money. And then over the years, they start getting bought out by all these big hospital systems. So, but the approach, there's some similarities and there's some differences, because when you're dealing with a bigger hospital system, there's going to be more red tape. There's going to be more layers, more individuals that you need to get buy-in from to get your products approved. A lot of times in an ASC, it could be, a couple of people that, or one doctor that says, I really want this. And the partners will say, all right, sure. If you want it, we're good. And he could just say, yeah, let's start using this here. I mean, sometimes because it could work, it could work in your benefit, because doctors will say, you know what, let's not do it at the hospital. Let's just get this done quicker next week. We'll do it at the surgery center. So it could be a much faster process too, selling to ASCs. I mean, it's hard for me I don't want to generalize too much, but typically, excuse me, it's a little bit easier to make things happen in an ASC than a hospital. But everybody wants to go after the hospitals because of the volume. So if you're selling a drug in a hospital versus an ASC, I mean, I did this selling, desflurane years ago, and I was selling canisters and, in different bottles of desflurane, purchases in a hospital. I could be selling, 500-600 cases a month. And in surgery centers, I'm selling 5. So that gives you a little indication. It's not always that drastic, but the volume is always going to be much more substantial in a hospital. And it's also going to come with much more work, much more red tape, many more call points. So it's definitely a much more complicated sale in hospitals.
Mikey Ferraro, how do you sell outcomes when the product literally just launched and there's barely any data on it yet?
That's tough, man. I mean, that's a great question, because it's not easy. It's not easy. You have to go after your early adopters. So look up. Why am I drawing a blank with the laggards, early adopters? I'm drawing a blank on the actual the different buyers out there. I'll get back to you with exactly the term, but bottom line, you want those doctors that are early adopters, and they're in every hospital. These are the ones that they don't need all the data. They can look at something and go, oh, wow, this sounds cool. Really, you got doctors. They like to be the first ones to do something. They're not as risk averse as some of the physicians in there that need to see all the clinical data before they give it a try. So you have to uncover those early adopters and then convert them into being champions for you. And that's how you can eventually get these products approved. But for a lot of you out there that want to get into startups, okay, startups can be amazing. I love startups. I'm an entrepreneur. I like creating my own business. But just like what I do, it's hard. When I first started doing RepPath, no one knew who the hell I was. I would talk to people. They'd be like, who the hell is this guy? They'll offer training. They didn't know who the hell I was. They didn't want to work with me. Reaching out to companies for consulting jobs, reaching out to companies to do recruiting. They didn't know who I was. I had no following. I had no background. It's very hard to get those first couple of customers to believe in you. But once you start having the success, you got to capitalize on that and that's how you grow it. But focus on those early adopters, try to convert them to being a champion, and then it should get much easier. But it's never easy, because a lot of you that want to get out of big pharma or big device and go to a startup, startups usually entice you with big salaries. They give you big positions. You'll go from being a sales rep to being a VP overnight, and you're like, wow. Meanwhile, you're a vice president of no one. They just gave you the title, and your product isn't utilized anywhere, and they have no data. They have no samples. There's nothing but just your word of mouth and maybe a picture or a demo, and you got to go in and sell it. That's real. It's hard as shit, but it can be financially amazing once you get through, all those hoops.
Dan the Man Fit. Do hiring managers actually test you on this stuff in interviews, or is this more about personality?
I mean, they could definitely test you, especially if you're going for a hospital role. Typically the hospital space is a promoted position. They, a lot of times, you know, especially in pharma, you know, pharma, they very rarely are going to hire, you know, a young kid right out of college and say, yeah, we got this hospital sales role, because it's intimidating. You walk into a hospital and you see how big it is and you're like, whoa, like, you know, it just intimidates you. There's much more complicated processes along the way than just walking into an office. But I'm sorry, I drew a blank. Read that again. I just lost my train of thought.
Do hiring managers actually test you on this stuff?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So they could definitely test you in there, you know, for some of these positions, especially hospital based. They want to see if you understand the strategy, because it's heavily, your success is heavily dependent on process, on a game plan, on a strategy. You're not just walking in, knocking on doors and, you know, getting time with a physician like in the office base. And I'm simplifying that too. But when you get into hospitals, they can test all this. They can test you on anything, guys. So you really want to be prepared. The more that you know, the more that you understand what you're getting into. That's why it's so important when you're going for any of these roles that you know the insides and out of that job. You're speaking to reps about that company. More and more reps, the more people you could speak to, the more that you can learn. And I say this all the time, get the information that you can't chat GPT or Google. That's gold. And that's the information that usually, you know, relates to some of this that you're talking about when they're testing you. When you know the insides, the in and outs of the daily challenges they're having and all that, and the solutions you could provide, then that's key.
Matt Cordone, how do you transition mid-conversation when you realize you've been going too heavy on product specs?
Well, again, you got to pivot. If someone's looking at their phone as you're talking, and you're not hitting them, you know, you're not hitting a sweet spot here. First off, what questions were you asking? So I would stop and start asking questions. You know, I mean, first I would just say, I'm sorry, did I lose you? Is this important? I just want to make sure, because I feel like I'm losing you here. I mean, be straight up, guys. You don't have to be rude, but if someone's not listening to you, you're not going to be like, oh, buddy, wake up. You know I'm here? Like, you don't have to say that, but just pause for a second. Be like, sorry, doctor. I just want to make sure. Is this important? Because I feel like I'm losing you here. You know, let's back up for a second and then start asking questions again and redirect, or his answers should help you redirect the conversation. But don't just keep talking, shooting features and benefits out if someone is sitting there and they're not listening. Guys, it takes a lot of time and effort to get these meetings. You want to get the most out of them. Okay. So you gotta stand your ground a little bit too, and realize that, you know, this is how you get paid. This is your job. This is your profession. You put a lot of effort into this, take a lot of pride in this. You don't want to just be ignored a whole call. So make sure that you're on the right page, and then, you know, you can pivot from there.
Michael Tran, how would you advise someone in the interview process to demonstrate an understanding of value-based selling without actual field experience to reference?
Well, again, you need to know the playing field. You got to speak to reps and understand what the daily challenges are, what the day in the life is like, you know, and then how are you providing solutions? How are you being seen as a solution? So you got to show your transferable skills, whatever that is in your previous, you know, position or your previous roles. It doesn't have to be sales based. You know, we could talk about how presenting is, you know, one of the things that is key in this job, and you're a teacher. Talk about your presentation skills, teaching students, and your effectiveness there. If it's an access problem and you weren't in medical sales before, well, say you're in a B2B sales role and it's always tough to get in front of restaurant owners, you know, and you understand what it took in the past, where instead of just calling on the owner, you also will call on the manager. You would call on the staff. You know, you figured out other ways to get past that limited access, and then show how you could translate that into the medical sales role. So it's understanding what they're doing and then taking your transferable skills from your previous job to show how you could be successful here.
That's all I got for you today, Joe.
Awesome, buddy. Thank you. Great questions.
Of course.
I appreciate it again. But thank you guys again. A lot of great questions out there. I know this is a little bit different of a topic, but it's very important, guys. focused on outcomes. Stop focusing on features and benefits. I'm not saying you don't talk about them, but just when you find yourself, ask the question like, so what is the result? What does this mean for the doctor? What does this mean for the patient? What does this mean for the hospital? You know, and if you see that it's like, well, this doesn't really connect, you're probably talking about a benefit. You're probably talking about a feature. You're not talking about an outcome. Outcomes equal value, guys, and that's how you be successful. But as always, guys, thank you again. Like I said, RepPath Academy, anyone that's struggling, reach out, go on RepPath.com or shoot me a DM. And if any of you are lobby members listening, please give me the promo code, submit the promo code Licata, and that'll enable you to get more discounts. You can see that on the screen there. And if not, this is our last call for the week. We'll be back next Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern. As always, every Monday and Wednesday at 3 p.m. If I don't talk to you guys, have a great week, great weekend, and we'll talk soon. Take care.